In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is teaching his followers on the meaning of discipleship. He's talking to them and to us about the importance of welcome. Welcome, or sometimes we prefer the word hospitality. Welcome has to be among the oldest of all sacred traditions. To welcome the stranger is to be open to the possibility of being in the presence of an angel. Oh, yeah. To welcome a child with a glass of cool water on a hot day is to fulfill the great commandment to love one's neighbor. And to welcome one who speaks a different language is to welcome God into our lives. Oh, yes. This concept of welcome is simple, yet so profound. It takes us to the heart of discipleship. Not so much to the dogma of what we believe, but to the ethics of how we act. Jesus raises the significance of welcome from an ordinary gesture to a spiritual practice. I must say that the primary reason I keep on accepting your invitation to preach here in the chapel is the radical welcome you always offer to me and to my family. You treat us here as family. Some of you actually say to me, Moni Bambo, Mulibwanji. Tom Lips said, Kwacha, which in Chichewa means a new day has dawned. In other words, you speak my language. That touches my heart in a deep place. When we head back to Glastonbury later this afternoon, we will feel refreshed and renewed and valued because of your welcome. A disciple is one who welcomes, one who sets out the welcome mat, one who flings the door wide open and says, come on in, let's have tea. Let's get to know each other. Let's build a relationship. Let's build a church. Let's be in the presence of God together. Lots of people tell me they encounter God out in the woods or out on the ocean or in their backyard garden. And that is awesome to me, and I rejoice in all those encounters. Our text for today hints at finding God in the context of radical welcome. There is just something mysteriously spiritual about the dynamics of welcome. It's not so much about the tea or the scone or the punch or the cookie. It's about the celebration of our shared humanity. The welcomer and the one welcomed are both made in the image of God. Both are made for loving and for being loved. It's in that celebration of our common humanity that God is revealed in an unmistakable way. There's a couple in our church in South Glastonbury who love to tell the story of their first day at the church. It was one of those Sundays when it was a packed house. I don't know why it was a packed house. Probably it was Easter. Well, it was a packed house, and this couple came in the front door, and they saw that every pew was full of people. Every pew was full of people. And then they saw what was something like a miracle to them. They saw up here in like the front row, two people going like this, waving like crazy. Come on, come on, come on. There's room in our pew. There's room down here in our pew. Whew. Well, that was the beginning, you see, of a lasting spiritual friendship. Those two couples hit it off and became deep friends. To this day, that couple who came for the first time are now the first ones to greet visitors at South Church. The miracle of welcome continues. I have a hunch. I have a hunch that Jesus lived at a time when welcome was a stingy commodity, a stingy commodity. I have a hunch that there was a suspicion of strangers, a hostility maybe to foreigners, a closed door approach to life. And thus, the community had shut itself off from the life-giving presence of God. Now, Jesus was constantly criticized for the company he kept. Oh, yeah. I mean, he welcomed lepers. Imagine that, lepers. He welcomed prostitutes. He welcomed even Samaritans. Whew! And probably he welcomed even those people, you know, the ones who hold up the cardboard sign that says, "Homeless, help me." He welcomed them too. It all has to do with having meaningful encounters with God. That's what discipleship is all about. Welcoming each other such that we encounter God. You know, I often return from Malawi, Central Africa, with stories to share. If you've been in church with me here before, you know I've got a Malawi story. Well, this time I have returned with a gift for the chapel. I have a gift for you. I have it right here. Get a look. Can you see this? This is a Malawi doormat. It's a Malawi doormat. It's made up of about 500 strips of discarded fabric pieces. None of the strips taken alone is worth anything. But the 500 strips stitched together announce this whole community of unique people welcomes you. Yeah, it was given to me by the church youth group in Malawi, and today I'm giving it to you, Watch Hill Chapel. I don't know how you'll use it or where you'll hang it or if you'll hide it, but I'm giving it to you. Malawi is known as the warm heart of Africa. And it's not because the sun bakes the land at oven temperatures, which it does. It's because the culture understands welcome as a spiritual practice. When we visited this past month, when we visited the village of Hamilton Chagwa, perhaps the poorest village in all of Africa, we tried every tactic known to humanity to release them from the spiritual practice of feeding the stranger. We didn't want to consume the meager amount of food which they had. So, drawing upon my highest diplomatic skills, I convinced Mr. and Mrs. Chagwa to feed us instead on the joy of music. Feed us on the joy of music. Whew, yeah. Well, what followed was a deeply spiritual encounter with drums and with singing and, yes, some dancing. By the time of our departure, there were no strangers. There were no strangers, just new friends. Friends who embrace a common humanity. We were connected, which means we were blessed. In my heart of hearts, I have to believe this is what Jesus had in mind as he taught his disciples about the mission of welcome. Many of us are familiar with the prayer of St. Francis. You know, the one that begins, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." Some of us have the whole prayer memorized. Some of us just know the first line, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." That prayer came to my heart as I was working on this sermon. For to be a disciple who welcomes the stranger and sees in that stranger's face the very face of God, that person is indeed being used as an instrument of peace. When in 1971, I was wrestling with my sense of vocation, what is God calling me to do with my life? The minister from my home church in Westfield, Massachusetts, the one who had had me in confirmation, who had put up with me, I should say, in confirmation, the Reverend Chandler W. Gilbert, sent me a copy of Alan Paton's book, Instrument of Thy Peace. Yeah. That prayer marked the beginning of my adult discipleship, pondering what would it mean for me to be an instrument of peace. I have to tell you, it's that experience of radical welcome in the warm heart of Africa that has convinced me of the deep truth that discipleship is about meeting people where they are and seeing in each a human being, a person made in God's own image. So I'm deeply moved by this passage in Matthew's Gospel where Jesus teaches the disciples, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and those who welcome me welcome the one who sent me. It just feels to me, as I move around the whole world, that this is the time for disciples to hear and to heed this basic teaching. For refugees abound. The number of homeless people keeps growing. The temptation to close and lock the door is greater than ever. And thus, the prophetic word of Jesus Christ is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. Perhaps it is as hard to hear today as it was hard to hear centuries ago. To welcome the stranger is to look that person in the eye and to see in that face the very face of God. This is how I have come to understand our calling as Christian disciples, and as always, I share this insight with you in the greatest of hope.